Okay, so we are live now, and a good evening, Nina. We're
Good
early,
evening. Good
as
evening.
always,
How are
because
you?
we can make some announcements. But at 6 o'clock, we're scheduled to have the Hillsborough County State Attorney Forum, where Andrew Warren, the current State Attorney of Hillsborough, will be asking or answering
Right.
a Q&A between me and you. We're gonna
Yeah.
alternate as moderators, so
Yeah.
they've been previously given the rules as to the forum, the time limitations, and the rules.
Hmm.
And so we're waiting for them to come on. But in the meanwhile, we will give a couple of announcements as to scheduled Florida U Judge broadcasts for tomorrow. Um, this should be an exciting forum. I can't wait to
It
ask
should be
some of these
really exciting.
questions. And
Yeah.
the first half of the hour long Hillsborough County State Attorney forum, the first half hour is going to be just dedicated to the questions and answers, and then the
Right.
second half is going to be, we're going to open it up for the public to call in 813-221-9700 and ask questions of both candidates. So please share,
Yeah, call
especially
in. Call in. Ask
call in.
questions. The
It's
last
your
30 minutes.
opportunity. Yeah.
Get somebody. Anybody that's interested. Get them to ask some questions. This is engaging the our civic responsibility. This is engaging the community. This is drawing everyone in to be a part of the process. Very
That's
exciting.
right.
Very
You know,
exciting.
we're
Yeah.
here. We've made it in, giving you the opportunity to call and ask important questions.
Hmm.
So now's the time to ask. You get to ask Hillsborough County State Attorney Andrew Warren, who's coming on along with Mike Perotti, his challenger. You get to ask them directly in the second half of the hour your questions. 813-221-9700 is the number to call if you'd like to ask them questions directly. So I'm just going to give a couple of announcements as to scheduled broadcasts for tomorrow. We have Hillsborough County Clerk of Court candidate Kevin Beckner. He's going to be on tomorrow at 2. And he's going to be talking to us about his candidacy. So tune in tomorrow at 2 live. He will be on, followed by Tammy Schamberger, who's running for Hillsborough County School Board. She's going to be on at 3 o'clock, and she's going to be taking calls in addition to discussing her candidacy. So if you want to call Tammy Schamberger, who's running for District 5 in Hillsborough County, to get another a term at being serving the public as a school board member, you get to call her tomorrow at 3. For tomorrow, we have Hillsborough.
Turn it down.
What do you?
I'm gonna share this on
Hate
my
when that
page.
happens.
I'm
Hate
gonna
when that
share-
happens.
I'm gonna share it. I'm looking at us on
Sure. So you know what the
Facebook, but I'm gonna share it on my Facebook page.
with the idea. Just what I do. Okay, so I'm coming off the air. That's weird. Okay, so now I'm back.
Yeah.
Nina, when you want to do that, just mute it. Share.
Yeah, I
then
turn it down. I usually
come back.
turn it down. Right.
Back so we don't hear the back.
My phone was up. The
No, I
volume was
understand,
up,
but
so
yeah. So, okay, and I do want to let the public know and give a shout out to Candy Lowe this Saturday, July 25th, between 10 a.m. to 12. She's going to be having tea and conversation. That's it's going to be my first one that I'm going to be attending, and I can't wait because I heard the last one was really good. There's not going to be any candidates, but there's some hot tea advertised for this upcoming tea and conversation. It's at Al's Finger Licking Good Soul Food, and it's going to be outside in the patio, and masks are required. So we have one of our participants awaiting. He's already in the virtual green room. Hi, Mike. How are you? He's early. Good. We're still awaiting Andrew to come on. But did you share that on your page already?
I did.
Also at 8 tomorrow, I am going to be joined by Michelle Williams at 8 o'clock. And we're going to be talking about having a discussion on concerning judicial campaign tactics. So that's going to be at 8. live, and she's going to be joining me in discussing an issue that arose in one of the Hillsborough County judicial campaigns, and we're going to be taking live call-ins during that broadcast as well. It's going to be a very interesting, important topic. Please tune in at 8 tomorrow for that. Can you fill a couple of minutes for me, Nina, while I share?
Yeah. I think it's just really important for folks who are getting a chance to tune in and view. We really want you to share what's happening here. What Haiti has here involving the community, viewers like yourself in the political process is super, super important. One of the biggest issues the community has is that folks are not as involved as they should be in the political process. Now, there's a lot of people that they want to, and I think it's great. You want to go out, you want to do marches, you want to walk, you want to for specific issues, but we must be active at the polls. We must be active at the voting polls to go and vote. Now, it's your decision whether or not you want to do a mail-in ballot. Me personally, I like to physically be there because I like to be part of the election process. I feel like when I walk into a poll, that a voting place, that I am actively and physically doing my duty. I am alert and I'm aware of what's happening. And also, too, it causes you to be mentally aware of the issues of the day and how important it is to be involved with what's happening in your community. So it's really fun. Haiti and I have an opportunity to reach out not only to those in Pinellas County, but Hillsborough, any surrounding county. I mean, we can talk on issues that focus on what's happening in the state of Florida, as well as what's happening around the country and around the world if we choose to. But the point is, this is an easy way for you to connect with what's happening in the world today. And it's from some local folks who are just like, you we're invested, we're interested in what's happening in our community, what's happening in the political process today. And so we just want to encourage you all to get out and vote, but not just get out and vote, inform yourself as to the issues that matter to you the most. Now, granted, there's not going to be one candidate that has every single issue that you desire, that you all are lined up on every single issue, but focus on the issues that matter to you. Focus on what you want to see done. In other words, if I elect this particular person, what has that person said they can do that will apply to me, to my community? Now, everything everybody does who's elected in the political office affects you, whether you think it does or not. Everything. So, pick your races. And I think too, the supervisor of elections usually gives you, either emails you or sends you something in the mail ahead of time as to who's on the ballot right before the election is to take place, whether it be a primary election or the general election, but they'll give you a ballot beforehand. So what we want to encourage you to do, take that ballot, listen to some of the shows here that are featuring some of those candidates, or Google, Dr. Google. We look at Dr. Google and get to know about your candidates. What I would say for you specifically is I would encourage you is, look at what a candidate has done in the past as a good indication of what that candidate is going to do in the future. I look for candidates who I know that their heart is going in the right direction. In other words, it doesn't mean necessarily the candidate may do everything that I think the candidate should do, but at least I know their heart is coming from a good place. And I believe that what's on their platform, that they're not just speaking rhetoric. I mean, rhetoric means they're just speaking just to speak, but there's really no heart that's involved in what they're doing. And you know that by some of the things they've done, especially if it's an elected official who's been elected in the past. You can go look at the track record of that elected official. You can reach out to that elected official yourself, send an email, or there's so many various different ways that you can connect to elected officials, former elected officials, and even those who are running who have never been elected to office. Folks are a little more open now in terms of how you can get to them, how you can communicate with them. So I
So we
believe
have
who we got?
four more minutes before we're going to start. The only one that I see awaiting is I'm still waiting for Andrew Warren to pop up
The
here.
pop on? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, I can. You gave me the mic. I can talk about the political process.
I was like, wow, we're gonna have a whole seminar here with
I don't have a problem.
educating the voters and yeah, we gotta have you on just to like go into that whole spiel.
Just to talk about, yeah, it's like, wake up, folks. Things are happening. I mean, I don't even know if I need to say this, but things are happening around the planet that we need to be aware of, and we need to be informed, especially our local,
very important.
Local political candidates. You know, a lot of people obviously know about the presidential election and some of the other stuff. So some of the other, even the U.S. Senate, U.S. House races, people seem to be more informed. But it's their local, like for example, judges. I mean, they're
very important.
They're deciding every day law that is affecting every single person in the county. Judges.
So we're providing this broadcasting programming.
Yeah, that's right.
And so State Attorney Andrew Warren just showed up on our virtual green room. Happy to see him there. And so we're 2 minutes away from the start of the Hillsborough County State Attorney Forum. And again, if you know anyone that votes in Hillsborough, this is a great broadcast to let them know. Please share so that others can know about their positions on the different areas that we're going to be asking about this evening. So please share.
Yeah.
And again, the second half hour will be dedicated to both of them they've agreed to take calls from
folks.
The public.
Call in.
So if you want to, we're going to just...
What's that number What's the number? I'm going to write it down.
Me and Nina are just going to...
Tell me what the number is.
813-221. 813-221-9700. Nina and I are just going to ask 30 minutes worth of questions. The two candidates participating in this evening's forum have been given the rules, and the rules are they both each get 1 minute for an opening, 1 minute for closing. They get 1 minute. We're going to strictly enforce the time limitations. If you go exceed the time restrictions, we're going to mute you. That'll be fun to be able to mute the state attorney. And that's a joke. They're going to get a minute each. If the opponent makes a misstatement or gives a mistruth or criticizes his opponent, then his opponent will get 30 seconds to rebut. Those are the rules, and we will be starting in 1 minute. Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you?
Good.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
We're
good.
Great.
We want to thank you for joining us this evening. This is a very important race, I would say. And
Definitely.
so we both, Nina and I, want to thank you for joining us. It's 6:00. For those of you who are tuning in, please, thank you very much for tuning in. And we'd ask that you start sharing and telling others to join so that we can, so that they can find out about the respective positions on different questions that we're going to be giving each one of the candidates this evening. So, who wants to go first for your 1 minute opening statement?
Do you want to do the rules first, or?
I just did. I gave the rules, I think. Yep. So let's start with Andrew. Andrew, go ahead. You have 1 minute, and let me start my timer. You can start.
Good evening. I'm Andrew Warren. It's my privilege and honor to serve as your state attorney. 4 years ago, I ran for this position on a platform of reform to bring a strategic problem-solving approach to our system. Working with other stakeholders, we've had tremendous success. Crime is down, our neighborhoods are safer. We've reformed juvenile justice through civil citations and reducing the direct filing of kids and investing in prevention. We've reduced the criminalization of poverty and embraced treatment for substance abuse and mental illness. We've supported victims. We've minimized our use of the death penalty. We've created a conviction review unit. We're addressing racial disparities. We've supported Amendment 4 and hosted expungement clinics. And we've been proactively engaged with our community to build trust. I'm extremely proud of the progress that we've made, but we have more work to do. I'm excited to continue that progress for the next 4 years with your support. Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Perotti.
Thank you, ma'am. So my name is Mike Perotti, and I'm really running on 3 different concepts: accountability, authenticity, and availability. And when I first announced that I was running in February this year, the first thing I did was call Andrew and let him know this wasn't personal. This was about giving the voters choices, because that's what democracy is about. In this race, you certainly have 2 different choices. There's Mr. Andrew, who's currently in office, and then there's myself, 3rd generation Tampa native, who is all about service and trying to be whatever he can be to help out this community, not politics, not money from abroad. I want to put victims at the very center of the prosecutorial universe again. I want to make sure that we are leading from within the office and outside to actually bring proper change, not just talk about it. I want to use the relationships and the mutual respect and the professionalism between law enforcement, the judges, the defense bar, to bring about efficient, real, fair, and consistent outcomes in all of our prosecutorial efforts. I want to try to bring about some of the changes that Mr. Warren simply talked about, and some of the things he's done are good, and others we'll talk about as the night goes on. I'm looking forward to the challenge. I'm really, really excited about the question and answer tonight.
Great. Hey, are you there? I think she's kind of frozen. I can move on. There she is. I can move on with, yeah.
Okay, so I'm
You good?
well, I don't need
Yeah.
it. Give me a second. Okay, listen. If there should be any technical difficulties, I'm going to ask that you just go ahead and hit the link again that was sent to you to come back on. That happens occasionally, so I just want us to, there might be some interruption. If there is, I will be immediate to fix whatever might be occurring. But just hit the link and come back on. Okay, Nina, ask the first question.
Sounds good. I'll ask this question first to Tony Perotti. Did I pronounce your name correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Okay. Do you believe that the Black and brown persons are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system?
Yes. I believe that if you look at the outcomes and you look at the actual data, some of it has to do with the policing philosophies that have been utilized at various times. Other aspects have to do with everything from potentially the family unit to educational opportunities to the economics of some of the communities that we're talking about. And you have folks that are left with decisions that are oftentimes leading to increased interaction with law enforcement, and then they get in the court system, and punitive measures that have financial repercussions start to take place, and you see a bit of a snowball effect that starts to happen. So yes, it's absolutely something that is a reality. Anybody who tries to say otherwise isn't being genuine about it.
And a follow-up question for that would be, what reforms are needed in the criminal justice system? Or should I ask?
Yes.
Attorney Warren, the same thing?
Yes.
Okay. State Attorney Warren, do you believe that Black and brown persons are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system?
They absolutely are. And it's not just minority communities, it's also people who are in low socioeconomic communities. I mean, the connection between economics and crime is hard to ignore. And so one of the things we need to do is look at the connection between access to high quality education, look at economic impact, because the criminal justice system doesn't operate in a vacuum. All those things factor into it. I'm extremely proud that within the system, we have taken part in a groundbreaking study with Florida International University, one of only 4 jurisdictions in the whole country to look at racial disparities as they're occurring in the prosecutor's office. Lots of decisions outside the prosecutor's office, but within the criminal context, lead to racial disparities. But we focus specifically on what are we doing in our office to address racial disparities. Again, groundbreaking study, extremely helpful information. It's an ongoing project for the FIU. It's just one example of how we're thinking outside the box.
Time's up. Time's up.
Attorney Perotti, what reforms are needed in the criminal justice system, and how would you implement those reforms without relying on the legislature to bring them to pass?
Well, first and foremost, I don't need a 2-year study to tell me that there are issues to address inside the courtrooms. If you sit in there for a couple of days and actually listen to the sentences being handed down, you will appreciate the need for some real leadership and action. I think that it starts with the relationship with law enforcement and trying to get them to rethink or reevaluate some of the resources and the tools that they're using in order to rebuild the relationship and the rapport within the community. When you start to lose the trust and you start to lose that line of communication, trying to keep a community safe that is at odds with you becomes very, very difficult. From there, it's dependent upon the prosecutor's office to ensure that they are thoroughly evaluating all the cases factually to determine which ones really are the ones creating risk for the community and which ones are getting caught up in the wash, so to speak. I think there's so much that could be done, as Mr. Warren talked about, with the financial implications of the criminal justice system. We could do so much in order to try to ease the strain on certain aspects with people being able to get out on bond, allowing them to ROR instead of holding them on $50 bond amounts that they can't post. Those are the types of things that have to go. But then it comes to real leadership with your prosecutors.
For your 1 minute. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. The next question is for.
Time's up.
Yes, time was up on that. State Attorney Warren.
I think, did you add?
Did I ask you that already? Or it's your question next, right?
No, but I'm happy to respond to that too.
Yes, yes, it's for you as well. What reforms are? No, I didn't ask him that question. Okay, sorry, we're managing asking questions and timing at the same time, so it's pretty fun. So we're gonna rely on you all a little bit.
They both have to get the same question.
Correct. So I want to make sure, because I believe I started with Attorney Perotti first, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So State Attorney Warren, what reforms are needed in the criminal justice system, and how would you implement those reforms without relying on the legislator to bring it to pass? I noticed you did mention some. Do you want to repeat those or talk about something new?
Well, let me talk about things we've done specifically to address the racial disparities in the system. In addition to that study to help identify where the exact decision-making points are. Things that we've done in terms of criminal justice reform: civil citations for juveniles, adult civil citations for first-time misdemeanor offenders. Between those two programs, we're talking about nearly 2,000 people a year we're keeping out of the criminal justice system, disproportionately Black and brown communities. The way we've addressed the criminalization of poverty, to take a different approach to people, for example, who have their driver's license suspended for economic issues. Rather than just blindly prosecuting the person, actually finding solutions and dismissing those charges when it's a financial reason that's underlying it and helping the person to get their license back. These are policies that have a dramatic effect on Black and brown and low socioeconomic communities. And that's exactly what we need to keep doing for the next 4 years, expanding on the things that we've put in place over the last 4.
Okay. Haiti, I believe you're the next question.
Okay, and so Nina, I need you to take over the timing.
Got it.
The time limitation.
Yes.
Okay, so this goes to I'm gonna ask both of you 2 questions. The first one is on the bail reform. Recently there was a community bail fund that was created to assist a nonviolent offenders policy so far as reform. And I can allow you, Andrew, to answer first.
So Haiti, you were breaking up a little bit there. I think you're asking about the community bail fund. Was that?
Yes.
I couldn't hear. Nina, was there a specific question about it?
Has this been a good policy and reform? That's the question.
Can you hear?
Yes, thank you.
Do you want me to repeat shit?
No, I got it. I covered you. I got it. I'll start right when you start. I'll hit the timer. Go. Attorney.
So this is a good thing. This is a step in the right direction. And for people who hadn't heard about it, this was a bail fund started by an outside law firm. It was done in Orlando, Morgan and Morgan. And now they wanted to bring it here in Hillsborough County, and they wanted to make sure that it was okay.
Mike, do you want to go ahead and answer that
He's answering it now.
first?
He's answering it now.
I can't hear him.
Yeah, I can. He's answering it now. We'll start from the beginning because you kind of got cut right at the beginning.
That's not a problem.
Haiti, I hope you can hear me. He's answering it now. Can you hear me? Do you want to try coming back
I
on?
can hear you and I can hear Andrew. I can't hear Mike Perotti.
I'm not talking.
He's not talking. He's good.
Okay. All right. This is like a Biden debacle.
Hey, this is
All right, go.
I'm sorry. Start.
This is like, I hope this is not a Biden glitch nightmare.
Yeah.
Okay, so go, Nina.
Yeah, State Attorney Warren, go for it from the top. Start.
Thank you. So the Community Bail Fund is a way to make sure that people who have been given a bail but can't afford to pay it aren't being kept in jail because of that inability to afford it. And so if an outside agency is coming in and posting bail for people, that's a great thing. As a state attorney, we don't want people being kept in jail because they're unable to pay. And it's one step in the right direction. Another big step that we've taken was to increase our RORs, so releasing people without any conditions of release for low-level nonviolent misdemeanors. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in our bail system, and the solutions, frankly, don't lie solely within the state attorney's office. It involves our judges, our public defender, and our legislature. But the Community Bail Fund, like our change policy to reduce or eliminate cash bond for low-level offenses, are two really important steps in the right direction.
Attorney Perotti.
Thank you. Community Bail Fund is a very charitable, nice thing. It's not reform. This is an outside group bailing people out. Reform is what we really actually need. It's funny that I listen to all of the measures that the state attorney's office is taking right now, particularly in response to COVID, about increasing the amount of direct files so people aren't sitting in jail as long, going ahead and allowing more RORs with the judiciary. All these things in our jail population over the last 4 months since March has dropped by 600 different inmates. If we're not letting dangerous people out and we're doing things that make sense and allow us to reduce the jail population, why couldn't that be done for the previous 4 years? That's reform. That's actually doing something about eliminating people sitting in jail unnecessarily. Hopefully it doesn't take a pandemic to get us to make smart decisions about not keeping people in jail if they don't have to be there. I think that when you talk about the community bail situation, like I said, very generous, very nice. It's not a reform and it's not a fix. It's just a new thing to try and get to a few deserving people.
Okay, so I wanted to ask this question, and this one is for you, Mr. Perotti, because I read a comment that you gave in reaction to the media in regards to this, to the this community bail fund, and your quote in the article that I read, you stated that the public defender and the state attorney need to work with the judiciary. Future, did you mean as to recent committee fund was used to bond out those who met the, if for the
You're coming in and out, Haiti.
You meant for the recent of that, do you have to have waited for the judiciary questioning?
You kind of
Nina, can you restate for me, Nina, if you can hear it?
You went in and out, Haiti, on that one. I think she was referring to a quote. You were quoted saying
give me a second. Can you hear me now?
No.
Nina, I think I know what she's getting at, and I'm happy to go ahead and
There
answer to the best of my ability.
Yeah, there was a quote that you made about waiting for here's what she was saying. You made a quote about addressing the bail issue reform, addressing bail reform. And the question is, how would the legislature or judiciary help with bail reform? And was there input necessary with what was done recently with the community bail reform? I think that's it.
All right.
She's popping back on.
Yeah, let me go ahead and try and clear up what the article with the reporter asked me that got that question. The question was, hey, the public defender, the state attorney primarily, but also public defender, are getting behind and going to be actively involved in this community bail fund. What do you think about that? I said, well, I'd want to be careful about being directly involved in that if I'm the state attorney or the public defender, because you're crossing over roles, and generally the folks representing somebody in a legal capacity, either as prosecutor or as defense attorney, don't also want to be playing an active role in the bond element of that. Aside from that, I said, like I kind of mentioned here tonight, sounds to me like a very generous, well-intended, compassionate thing for private citizens to offer up for those in need. But again, not meaningful fix. What I want to talk about is let's look at the uniform bail schedule that we use in the 13th Circuit. Let's try and find more flexibility so that more folks are getting RORs. Because look, the bottom line is this: when you're in a jail for as many years as I've been, you understand the number that are in there don't need to be there. That's just a fact. There's just a number. And my frustration was I could never get them out fast enough because it needed too much help from the state attorney and public defender.
That's a minute. Thank you so much for responding to that question. Haiti, how are you doing with your sound? Just checking in real quick. Okay, still not here. All right. Well, it's my turn for the next questions anyway. So we ready to go, gentlemen?
Sure.
Great. So we want to talk about diversion programs, and I'll go to State Attorney Warren first on this. There's a RIDR, Reduced Impaired Driving Recidivism Program. Give the viewers your opinion as to whether or not that's a good or bad idea.
Sure. So what we call RIDR actually isn't a diversion program. It's an enhanced sanction charging policy.
Okay.
And the basis is pretty simple. What we do is we take first-time DUI offenders and people who are likely to end up with a reckless driving conviction, and instead we impose the sanctions, the enhanced sanctions that you would get if you had been convicted of DUI. So alcohol monitoring, an ignition lock device, going through the MAD victim impact panel. We want to make sure that we are addressing the underlying sanctions, the underlying reasons why people commit DUI in the first place to reduce the recidivism. And the program's been a huge success. I mean, we've had, in the first 2 years, we had zero recidivism. Of almost 800 people had gone through that program. This program was supported by MAD, Florida, and in fact, they gave us an award for it because they knew that it was a great approach to actually combat impaired driving in our community.
And I will now allow Attorney Perotti to respond to that. What do you think about the program? Is it good or bad?
Well, without being able to crawl through Mr. Warren's records and see what those outcomes are that he's talking about, I would say that from the outside looking in, my concern is this. Hillsborough County has been atrocious when it comes to deaths on our highways related to impaired driving. We've been number 1 or number 2 for as far back as I can remember. I have a hard time getting behind anything that even remotely has the appearance of sending the wrong message about how serious or how problematic the notion of getting behind a vehicle impaired is. So really, of all of Mr. Warren's programs, that's the one that I want to take the closest look at to make sure that the outcomes promised, i.e. reducing recidivism, is really what we're getting out of that. Because saving lives is what we should all really be caring about. There's a lot of built-in sanctions that go with DUIs, and I think I share the same frustrations that others do. And sometimes the punishment doesn't quite fit the crime. But I think that that's one of those offenses with all the other options out there from getting to point A to point B in Hillsborough County. I don't want to send the wrong message about taking it lightly.
Okay. Thank you for that response. Appreciate that. Next, we're going to talk about juvenile direct files, and I'll allow Attorney Perotti to respond first. Now, I have practiced juvenile direct file for many, many years. I practiced at the public defender's office in Pinellas County. And I understand the process, how it works. It is a specialized area in criminal law, specifically whether it's criminal defense or prosecution. What are your respective positions? What is your position, Attorney Perotti, on direct files? And I'll ask this specific question. Should the state attorney be actively involved in helping to forward more direct files, or maybe looking at what are other things that the state attorney's office can do to keep the juvenile cases in the juvenile court? Not all cases, depending on what the circumstance, have to be direct filed. And I'm not going to go through the whole law. So I am making a general statement. I'm just saying, without going through the various aspects of the law, just want to get an overview of your thoughts so the viewers can understand what your thoughts are about direct filing. That means filing juvenile defendants' cases being filed in adult court. Just explaining that for the viewers. Go for it.
So thank you. So to respond to your question, obviously it's a necessary component that should be utilized in the most appropriate cases, because when you're dealing with kids, as we all once were, kids sometimes do stupid things. And I think the intent behind a lot of the juvenile justice reform is trying to make sure that we don't penalize children in such a way that we are likely leading them down a path where you're going to have future adverse outcomes. Mm-hmm. So what you have to do, and where the failure starts to come in, is identify, given the nature of the wrong, given anything we know about the past conduct of the child, how to differentiate those that should be just held and dealt with clearly as a juvenile, so that you're not going to create that pipeline, if you will, for them, versus those that you have to treat more seriously because of the nature and gravity of their offense. What I'm concerned about is the lack of continuity with the community in trying to get through to these young kids so that we can teach them a different way on the first transgression rather than the seventh or eighth or ninth.
Mm-hmm. State Attorney Warren, what is your response to that question in terms of what your office is currently doing and what your philosophy is about that?
So charging kids as adults should be reserved for the most serious, violent, chronic offenders. This is Juvenile Justice 101. This had been a problem in Hillsborough County for the last 20 years. It was a priority that I made during the 2016 campaign. It was something that we started addressing from day one to reduce the number so that Hillsborough County was no longer a state and national outlier in this. Sitting here today, 3 years later, we have cut our direct files by 69%. We have stopped direct filing kids for nonviolent crimes. Drug possession was one of the biggest ones. Instead, we're focused on those rare cases where kids need to be brought into the adult system for the safety of our community. This is just another example of how we have successfully reformed what we're doing with kids to steer more kids out of the system while making sure that we're keeping our neighborhoods safe.
Okay. All right, I have another question. I will turn this over to State Attorney Warren. I'm going to ask you a question about the death penalty. The death penalty is the highest punishment that can be imposed. And clearly, if you get it wrong, there's no chance to correct it. What is your perspective regarding your prosecutorial philosophy in regards to the death penalty?
So this was another priority of mine coming in from 2016, that the death penalty needs to be applied fairly, consistently, and rarely. Fairly means not used as leverage to coerce a plea, but making sure that we are looking at the most aggravated, least mitigated offenses, those worst of the worst that merit capital punishment. Consistently is making sure that we're being consistent in how we apply it from case to case, and making sure that we're not creating racial disparities in our use of the death penalty. And rare means rare. Over the last few years, we have drastically reduced our use of the death penalty. This was another area where Hillsborough County was a national outlier that I pledged to fix, and we've done exactly that. I think we've done a really good job of being very conservative in how we use the death penalty for those few worst of the worst cases that merit the most severe of punishments.
Thank you. And I will allow Attorney Perotti to respond.
Thank you. Death penalty is on the books and absolutely should be a sanction that can be leveraged and brought into play when it is, and I agree with Mr. Warren there, in the most heinous, most egregious cases is when it really should be employed. It's not something that anybody should ever take lightly. Certainly we shouldn't be using excessively and never ever allowed to be used when we're not 100% certain that this is the person who's committed a heinous crime against our community. I will tell you, one of the concerns that I have and one of the things that I want to try and address when I get in the office is consistency in how we're utilizing, whether it's that sentence or even the juvenile direct file. Politics should never play a role in it. The pressure from the press or the media should never play a role in it. And I do get concerned sometimes when I watch individuals in leadership positions that tend to sway one way or the other depending on how hot it gets in the kitchen, so to speak. And I don't want to ever charge a juvenile as an adult just because I believe that would be easier for me. I would never want to charge a person who's committed a crime in a way that would get them a death penalty unless that really is the right outcome as well.
Thank you very much for those responses. Haiti?
I don't want to say anything in case I mess everything up with the internet connection. So
Want me to
you
ask?
want to go ahead and take it?
Yes.
I'm freaking out. I'm terrified. Yes, to say anything and jinx this whole good.
It's doing good.
flow
It's doing well. It's
without
doing
any
well.
interruption.
Gentlemen, we're almost.
There's one more. There's two
Yes.
more questions.
There are two more questions, and then after that, we'll open it up to folks who are free to call in. So, two more questions. These two questions are focused on prosecutorial prosecution and police misconduct. Okay, so I'll give the first to State Attorney Warren. Do law enforcement at times lie? And what should the criminal justice system do when they are caught? I'll have you answer that question first. 1 minute, please.
Do law enforcement sometimes lie? I think there are times where law enforcement is saying things that aren't true. Lie implies an intent to actually mislead. Where we see that intent to mislead, that can be a potential criminal charge. The more common instance where this happens is when we're seeing things that law enforcement is saying that may not be accurate, either because they misunderstood what happened or because of their perspective on the situation. That's why a prosecutor can't simply be a rubber stamp for law enforcement. We have different jobs, different responsibilities, different standards. So we make sure to go talk to law enforcement. I visit new recruits as they're going through the sheriff's office. I regularly meet with our law enforcement officers to talk about things that we're doing. We've held training in our office to teach law enforcement officers about how to testify, about helped to how they prepare reports. What we want to do is make sure that we're giving law enforcement the tools to help us build cases, but then exercising our independent judgment for how we go forward in those cases and whether we do so at all.
Thank you very much. Attorney Perotti, I'll allow you to respond to that question. Do law enforcement at times lie, and what should the criminal justice system do when they are caught?
Law enforcement officers are humans. They absolutely lie sometimes. Sometimes they do it on purpose. Sometimes they do it by accident. But they are no different than anybody else, and they are just as capable of doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. That's why it's so important to have relationships between the state attorney's office and law enforcement that truly exposes that and holds people accountable, which is sometimes very, very difficult and painful to do. I'm going to go ahead and tell everybody that the relationship between law enforcement and the state attorney's office right now is not functioning very well. Cases get null pros and dropped, or they don't proceed with things, and there's no communication back to law enforcement on why that happened or what the issue with the case was. By being very critical, like the state attorney's office should be, on all those cases, if there is a problem, that needs to be discussed at the very beginning of there starting to be a recurring pattern. That's how you prevent it from becoming something more significant. But on a day-to-day action, look, the state attorney's office certainly can't tell the sheriff or the chief of police what to do with administrative disciplines on their own folks, but they absolutely can hold deputies and officers accountable completely like they would anybody else out there, and that's what the public deserves.
I'm going to give you an opportunity, if you would like, State Attorney Warren, to respond. 30 seconds. Would you like to?
Sure. I think my opponent's comment shows a lack of understanding about how this system is supposed to work. there's what we call a positive tension. We both are on the same team trying to achieve the same outcome, which is public safety, fairness, but we have different roles, different standards. So we've worked extremely well with our law enforcement leadership on expanding and creating programs, civil citation programs. Our conviction review unit has the support of our law enforcement leadership. The rider policy that we talked about before, support of
That's your 30 seconds.
So it's the individual cases where we're supposed to have a different view of how things work. We have a much higher standard than law enforcement does. That's why the communication is so key.
All right, last question, and I will give that to Attorney Perotti first. State attorneys have the obligation to disclose to defendants exculpatory and impeachment evidence. What should the commitment of a state attorney be when prosecutors fail to meet those obligations?
You have struck at an essential chord, if you will, for the entire justice system. It's one of the rules we play by. And when individuals remove the professionalism from the equation and start worrying about winning and start worrying about trying to get one up on the other side, you've really got a problem with our system then, because it should not be about that. There are rules of procedure that we should all be guided by, and there's certainly laws that we should all be guided by, and it's not hard and it's not difficult, and it is about holding each other to those principles. If there were folks working in my office that were not engaging in the appropriate discovery process, that were not disclosing Brady evidence, or that were not coming forward with legitimate bases that could result in somebody's acquittal or proof of innocence, they wouldn't be working for me very long. And that's all that would come down to. The role is to ensure absolute accountability from top to bottom in that office.
And for you, Attorney Warren, what do you think are the obligations to deal with this if prosecutors fail to meet the obligation of revealing exculpatory evidence or impeachment evidence?
I mean, turning over that evidence is a constitutional requirement. So it's part of our job as prosecutors. It's not about convictions, it's about achieving justice. And so where a prosecutor is, inadvertently withholding something, meaning they forget to turn it over, it's something that needs to be addressed to make sure it doesn't happen again. In a situation where a prosecutor is knowingly not turning that information over, then that's obviously a more serious infraction. This is about making sure that prosecutors understand what their responsibilities are. And it goes with the culture of the office. From day one, we've tried to implement a culture and have successfully implemented a culture to teach prosecutors that their job is about seeking justice. Don't care about whether you win or lose the case as much as I do whether you did the right thing, whether you used your judgment and discretion, whether you protected people's constitutional rights and the rights of the system. That's what leadership is. And again, we've set that standard from the beginning, and it's carried on through the last 4 years and will for the next 4 as well.
Okay. I believe now it's time for your closing statements. And then after that, we'll hand it over to Haiti see if we have some call-ins. Who opened? You all remember?
Wait. I wanna go ahead and I wanna highlight a comment that just came in by Kevin Arman. This is brutal. Boot Haiti. Let Nina ask the questions. You know what, Kevin? Sorry about this evening's Joe Biden technological glitch moment. I apologize. My apologies to you. But I can't. Some things I can't control, and I'm sorry to the viewers. Would you? Exactly. But much love to you, Kevin. Love to you, and have a great evening after the event. We're 48 minutes into the forum, and we did tell the public that we'd take call-ins. If after you guys give your 1 minute closing, are you still available to go a little bit over the hour, please? Because of
Absolutely.
the difficulty that we had at the beginning. Thank you both. Okay.
Okay. I think it was State Attorney Warren did the first opening. Is that correct?
Yes.
He did. So we'll let
Attorney Perotti do your closing first. You may begin.
Thank you. Well, I thank you all for the good questions. Look, this is a very, very important decision for this community to make. I think that there were a lot of good things that were brought in before Andrew got there. They had already started. There were people working very hard for these diversion programs, juvenile diversion, the mental health diversion, the veterans court diversion, juvenile, all of that stuff. There were people working very hard on those things. Andrew came in and they were finalized under his leadership. My concern now is that as we look at what the ultimate outcomes are, we can talk about reduced crime and we're not filings doing that, but funny that the jail population just doesn't change at all over the past 4 years until COVID. It's been sitting on 3,000 inmates for forever. So I'm not sure who's getting the benefit of all of these reductions and changes and everything else like that. But what I really want to do is I want to bring the absolute transparency and equality that everybody's deserving, regardless of race, regardless of affluence. It doesn't matter if you live on Bayshore or if you live off of 40th Street. You should have availability and accountability to your state attorney at all times. That's what you're going to get with me.
Thank you for that, Attorney Perotti. And State Attorney Warren, you're up next.
Well, thank you to Haiti and Nina for hosting, and thanks to all of you for the opportunity to serve. The defense bar is an important stakeholder in the success of our system. A lot of you didn't know me back in 2016 when I was elected, but you've given me a chance. And that productive relationship has facilitated the success that we've had. With the help of many stakeholders, I've done exactly what I said I was going to do. Crime is down some 22% over the past 3 years, and we have made Hillsborough County a leader, not just in our state, but across our country in terms of reform. We have the leadership in place now to continue that success with our public defender, our sheriff, and in the state attorney's office. And now is not the time to change course. We need to continue full speed ahead to implement the vision that I laid out 4 years ago. I want to thank you for what you do every day as defense counsel, upholding defendants' constitutional rights, and being candid in identifying problems and helping me find solutions. I'm humbled to have earned your support and trust 4 years ago, and I ask that you continue to place your confidence in me as we can achieve together for what we can achieve here, building a safer, stronger Hillsborough County. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for those of you who are still
Thank you for that, gentlemen.
viewing
Appreciate
and you'd
it.
like to call
Yes.
in and ask either Perotti. Yeah, we do. We do. Thank you so much. If you want to call in, 813-221-9700. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself real quickly so that I can start taking whatever calls might come in, Nina.
Okay. All right. We'll see who we have on tap for any calls. Do we have anybody, Haiti? I think she's waiting to get someone in. I love how she has this technology. This is a new way of campaigning, folks. I'm just telling you. With all the things that are happening, it's just a new way to connect to the viewers. So appreciate your time here.
It's all new to me. This is all new to me. I got no idea what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's see what she's got there.
Okay, we have a caller. Michelle Williams is calling in with a question. Go ahead, Michelle.
Can't hear.
Are you Can you hear her?
No.
You may have to write it in if we can't, if they can't hear it.
You have reached the voicemail box.
Caller, if you're on Facebook or any of the other avenues, can you just maybe text it in or send a message?
Okay, she's back. She's back. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. This question is specifically for Attorney Perotti. I've been doing.
Can you hear her?
I've been doing my due diligence and I've been doing my homework regarding him and his run against the incumbent state attorney Andrew Warren. Mike, something you've done that has really, really impressed the Black community. Before you even thought about running for this office and for this seat, were already doing the right thing. You were holding corrupt and bad police officers accountable. There was an incident that took place 7 years ago, went against the grain into going, if you are elected the next state attorney for one of the largest districts in actually the country, are you willing to continue to have that momentum of arresting and holding bad officers accountable? Because that's what we need right now.
Yes, the answer is absolutely. It's not a secret. I spent several years as a major and even time as a colonel. And in that position, I had the obligation to hold my staff accountable. And certainly if any other law enforcement came in to any of my jail areas and I was aware of bad acts on their part, I held them accountable too. My idea of backing the blue is that you hold the blue to the highest possible standard that you can, because that's how you actually keep them all safe. Look, the majority of people who wear a badge for a living are good people. They're good men and women, but amongst them, there can be bad actors, or even good people can make mistakes. Holding them to the highest levels of accountability is how you keep them safe and how you ensure that the citizens that we're all protecting and serving never become the victim of overzealous police activity. I've got a track record of holding my people very accountable. I'm probably responsible for firing and or terminating more people than certainly than I wish I had to, but it was the job, and it will continue to be my job in a criminal capacity should the need arise.
Haiti, I have someone who's trying to get
All right,
through, but they haven't been
caller,
able to.
I have somebody on the line right now. Okay, caller,
Got it.
ask your question.
Hey, I was kind of piggybacking off of the previous question. I know about a year ago, there was a bunch of Tampa police officers involved in like a body cam shutting it off. And that's kind of all that was released. Why weren't those officers prosecuted, given what's going on in the world right now with police officers turning that off? What can we do to fix that?
So let me address that first. There was the issue of, I'm sorry, I'm hearing a bit of an echo, so apologies. There was an issue last year where TPD had determined that 3 officers had been turning their body cams on and off improperly. It's actually a violation of the standard operating procedure of TPD. So there was no evidence that they had committed any crimes, such as planting evidence or abusing suspects in custody. So in that regard, it was a civil issue for law enforcement to address. But we went a step further on the criminal system. We went back and reviewed some 250 cases that those officers were involved in with the conviction review unit that we had. That's a specialized unit to review questionable convictions. And we ended up vacating 17 convictions. Now it's been 18 convictions, where we just lost confidence in the integrity of those convictions because they were solely based on the officer's testimony, where those officers had lost credibility. And that was something that we did in conjunction with Tampa Police. Chief Dugan stood next to me as we made that announcement, because we both supported the idea of where officers aren't doing the right thing, even if it's not arising to criminality. We can't sustain convictions based on people where we've lost confidence in the integrity of those convictions. And I know it was the first time in the history of Florida that a prosecutor's office had overturned convictions because of police misconduct based on their own investigation.
Okay, Patty.
Yeah, this question is directly for State Attorney Andrew Warren. When I wrote a letter to him requesting him to reopen my son's case because he was murdered by Tampa Police Department, and he had fired some officers for the same exact reason that the confidential informant stated was happening with the CIs and the confidential informant and his handlers in the Tampa Police Department, and that just got no response.
Okay, thank you for your call-in, Patty. You want to respond, Andrew?
Sure. I can't get into the specifics of the particular case, but we often have citizens coming to us and saying, hey, can you please look into this? And even though we're not an investigative agency, we've been proactive about asking law enforcement to reopen investigations, about going back to see how decisions were made before I even came into office on things that we can remedy, and where we're identifying problems to continue to work to address those going forward. So that's something that we're discussing right now in terms of how law enforcement is handling, for example, de-escalation in that particular example, where they should be using deadly force and where they shouldn't be using deadly force. So even though we can't remedy all the mistakes of the past, we're trying to learn from some of those mistakes and move forward in a productive way for the safety of our community.
Okay, caller, you're next. You're up. What's your question?
Talk now.
Yes, you're on
Okay.
live. Yes.
I'm calling. This is a question for Mike Perotti. I know he was Perotti. I know he was in charge of the jail at one point, and I'm a lifelong Tampa resident. And I remember a few years ago there were some issues with deaths in the jail, and I didn't know if he was there during that time frame.
So there were a couple different.
And if he had any.
There were a couple different. Sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay, thank you. Is that it? Is that your comment question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know how if he was.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Mike, you want to answer that?
I can, yes. I was at the I was a major in the jail divisions between 2010 to 2000 and beginning of 17. At what time I was promoted to colonel. So yes, there are absolutely deaths that occur in that jail during the time I was a major. Whether the deaths actually occurred in my division, because there's Orient Road, Falkenberg, is really irrelevant. Your question is simply this: under my command, what type of things happened, or when my command was involved, were there things that I could have done differently that might have changed those outcomes? Running a jail is like running a small city with people who not only have committed criminal offenses, arguably, but are in some cases very, very sick. So we have all of the same issues that a hospital has, as far as people going through detox, cancer patients, tuberculosis, you name it, we've got it back there. We do on-site blood transfusions actually at the jail. So, I think that when you look at what caused those deaths, that's the important thing. They were medical in nature by and large. There is one that I will speak to specifically that there was an article about, because although he ended up dying for medical reasons, that started with a use of force event involving one of our deputies. The deputy didn't work for me at the time, but it did involve one of the deputies. And the use of force was completely appropriate. It was a simple takedown, but it did cause a head injury that ended up becoming a contusion that led to a brain bleed weeks later. And unfortunately, that inmate did pass away. I'm very proud of the track record of my jail for the time that I was in command of it.
Okay, we have another caller, and caller, you're on live. Ask your question or make your comment.
Good evening, gentlemen. I have a several-part question. My first part of the question is, have either of you ever taken an implicit bias test? Why or why not? And then the next part of the question is, would you consider requiring implicit bias testing for your state attorneys? Why or why not?
Thank you, caller.
You want me to answer first?
I guess that's for both of you.
I'll answer.
Andrew, you want to answer that
Andrew.
first?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So I have taken an implicit bias test. I did a test that Harvard developed a few years ago. And I've also taken a second implicit bias test. I've done that as part of a training that I've done as a prosecutor with other prosecutors from around the country. I haven't actually thought about making prosecutors take implicit bias tests. Instead, what we've done is focused on implicit bias training. We now have implicit bias training in our office as part of a expanded training program that we do for all attorneys, from the most junior attorney to the most senior ones. We're making sure that we're trying to teach attorneys not just about what they should be doing in the courtrooms, but making them aware of things that they may not be aware of as they go through the process. And that comes back to the research assignment, the research project I was talking about before with FIU. Having independent researchers come in and say, hey, here's some blind spots that you may not appreciate, which is factoring into your decision making, that's leading to disparate outcomes. That's really valuable information. And that's why we're proud to have been, as I said before, one of 4 jurisdictions in the whole country to participate in this study.
Okay, and we're just 4 minutes over the 1 hour scheduled broadcast, so we're good on time. And thank you guys for being so patient with it. Kind of the early on Q&A took more time than we anticipated. We have a caller on the line, and go ahead,
Did you want
caller, with
Attorney
your
Perotti
question,
to
comment.
answer that as well?
Oh, did he? Oh,
I
I
can keep it short.
apologize. Okay, just hold on for me, caller, real quickly. Mr. Perotti is going to answer the implicit bias testing question, and then you're up.
Write this down. I
Thanks,
agree with
Mike.
Andrew. I agree with Andrew 100% on his answer. Yeah, I've taken the test
Oh,
before.
great.
I've taken the test before. They are important. They are understanding because it's about, look, I say nobody. Most people don't want to have bias. They don't want to allow those types of things to factor into decision making. That's why it's important to expose, because you don't know what you don't know. Yes, it's a good test, but yes, the training is important, and I would ensure that it happens annually in that office for all staff. Absolutely. It's something that helps educate people and bring them forward, understanding themselves.
Haiti, for some reason,
Okay,
there's an
caller, there's a
echo.
caller.
I'm just telling you, for some reason, there's an echo. So when they talk, there's an echo. So make sure maybe you mute.
Okay, all right, go, caller. You're next.
Okay, thanks for taking a call. This
Yep.
is A. Wellington Barlow. I'm the CEO of Technologies for Justice, and this question is for the state attorney. As you may know, Julie Holt's office is using our equity and sentencing analysis system. Matter of fact, her office is one of the biggest users of it, of all the PD offices that we have. But I remember when she purchased the system, she wanted me to do a demo for you and Judge Perotti, and so we never could schedule that. Do you recall that scenario, and why didn't we get it scheduled with your office?
Sure,
I believe
yeah.
that question's for you, Mr. Andrew.
I don't recall what happened in terms of it not getting scheduled between our office and you from the courts. But again, this goes back to the project that now I've mentioned, I think, 3 times tonight with FIU. I mean, we have a team of researchers that are looking at data for the past several years with grant funding from the MacArthur Foundation that produced a comprehensive report last year on racial disparities. And now we're following up on that report through this year to identify where we can do a better job to make sure that we are actually having consistency in our sentencing. That report identified some really good things that we were doing in the office and identified some areas where we need additional work. So this was a comprehensive project. Through the MacArthur Foundation, the results are back. We're now implementing what we've learned into our office, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are being consistent and helping and identifying those blind spots that we have that lead to the disparate outcomes we know exist.
Anything else, Mr. Barlow?
Yes, specifically ESAS, just for everybody's educational awareness, ESAS is a remedy for inequitable sentences, and it has already saved the taxpayers on 5 cases $1.5 million based upon OPAGA's research. So we're just wondering, why the state attorney offices were kind of reluctant to use it, because it's so effective. But anyway, I just wanted to ask you that question. Thanks for your answer.
Nina, can I comment?
Thank you for calling in. Oh, wait, yes.
Attorney Perotti. Okay,
You can
Attorney
answer,
Warren,
Mike. You can respond to that.
and then Attorney Perotti.
Yeah, again, there's no reluctance. We'd love to learn more about the program to figure out how we can use that in addition to other things that we're doing in the office to address racial disparities.
Attorney Perotti.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I wasn't in the office when you came through, Dr. Barlow, but I'd love to sit down with you. I've done my research on your program. It fascinates me because the way I look at it, it's not just an obligation to try and bring that transparency and ensuring there's no disparate outcomes within my own circuit, but quite frankly, all 20 circuits should be on the same page. So any type of a tool that puts it in a broader, more universal perspective, I would be fascinated and interested to sit down and look at it more closely. I know Ms. Holt's a big fan of it. She and I have talked about it, and I'd be happy to sit down with you next year, take a closer look. I would be fascinated and interested to sit down and look at it more closely. I know Ms. Holt's a big fan of it. She and I have talked about it, and I'd be happy to sit down with you.
There's a little echo there.
Okay, we have another caller on the line. Go ahead, caller.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I just had a question for State Attorney Andrew Warren following the recent Supreme Court decision regarding Amendment 4. Andrew Warren, I know you've been doing a lot of work for citizens in the state for that. Can you just kind of explain to the citizens what you've been doing for Amendment 4 currently?
Sure. So Amendment 4 was the voter initiative back in 2018 that restored the right to vote to returning citizens. 65% of Floridians voted for it, which is impressive because it's hard to get 65% of people to agree on the color of the sky these days. So Florida made clear that they wanted change in how we were handling returning citizens and the restoration of rights. We took the initiative locally to implement Amendment 4 and create a process to do so because the legislature had failed to act. Now we're doing that not just because it's the will of the voters, but because studies have shown that restoring the right to vote reduces the likelihood of somebody reoffending. So this is a public safety issue. It's an issue of transitioning back to our community. And of course, it's about fairness and fulfilling the will of voters. So we launched that docket in June. It got delayed a little bit because of COVID. And now it's in limbo again because of the state of litigation that's going on. But we are committed to doing everything we can to implement Amendment 4 in a way that doesn't discriminate against people because of how much money they have in their pocket.
Do you want to also respond to that?
Absolutely,
Mike?
Yeah, Amendment 4 was passed, as Mr. Warren said, by a strong majority of the folks of this state. Our job as state attorneys is to follow the law and implement the will of the people. It's unfortunate that the legislators can't seem to get on the same page and get this thing ironed out so that we're not going back and forth with a bunch of litigation on what completing your entire sentence exactly meant the way it was written. It's one of the things that frustrates me about politics. But hopefully it'll get worked out soon, because if you've done you've paid your dues, you've done what you had to do in order to make amends to society, you've completed the meaningful parts of your sentence, and you're ready to become a full-fledged voting part of the community again, why shouldn't we want that? Why wouldn't that be something we want to try and encourage for everybody? Let's just figure out real quickly what completing the entire sentence means, and hopefully they'll work it out sooner rather than later so we don't have people in limbo for an eternity.
Comments, and I'm going to take those comments from the persons that have written them instead of called them in. This is from Eddie Port. We've had some pretty disruptive protests or demonstrations recently. Property has been damaged, law enforcement assaulted, TPD ambushed, roads blocked, etc. When does exercising 1A cross over into criminal behavior, and what's the best response? And both of you can answer that.
Sure. So I'll start. It's an important question, Eddie. Thank you for asking. You asked, when does the First Amendment right cross over in criminal behavior? When it's doing the things that you described in your question. You can exercise your First Amendment right loudly, vocally, strongly, without assaulting law enforcement, without destroying property. And we in the state attorney's office have made a clear distinction from the beginning that we will proudly support people's right to free speech. And we will support that right even when we disagree with the free speech, even though in this case we agree with a lot of the protests in terms of addressing racial disparities in the system. We will not, however, tolerate people who are committing crimes and detracting from the voice of the protest. So when we had people who were peacefully protesting in what was largely a peaceful protest, we did not file charges against them who were arrested. In cases where people have been in these protests that have turned into rioting and looting, we filed charges against 60, 70, I think we're up to 100 people now for destruction, attacking law enforcement, theft, etc. That's about public safety. It has nothing to do with peaceful protests.
The First Amendment is absolutely something to be protected and cherished by anybody who's in a position of authority to do so. But I believe that the distinction needs to be made when you're talking about strong leadership in the most difficult times, when you're talking about unprecedented civil unrest in our own community that we haven't seen in decades. That's when all the leaders really need to step up and get out there in front of it to try to ensure that everybody's rights, needs, and interests are protected from square one. So what Mr. Warren said is true. We've got to balance out that protecting that First Amendment right with also making sure that we're not having property damage and looting and arson and all these other terrible, heinous acts. But I respectfully wish that on the occasion, for instance, when there were 67 apparently false arrests in downtown Tampa, I would humbly submit that if Mr. Warren maybe had been out there that night to see with his own eyes what was going on, to perhaps be providing the type of advice and opinions to the chief of police and the mayor at the time the decisions were getting made, possibly 67 people wouldn't have been apparently wrongfully arrested or taken a trip down to jail that they didn't take, or being nose to a peers, whatever ended up happening that night. That's called leading from the front. I was out there on Fowler when everything was burning from University Square Mall eastward. Chief of Police was out there. That's where leaders need to be. Mr. Warren wasn't out there. I think that that's how you get a firsthand account of what's happening in your own town so that you can make real-time decisions about what we need to do next. That way we're not making mistakes or calling do-overs or separating what should be some pretty cohesive operations by our criminal justice system.
Do you want to respond, Andrew, to
Sure.
that?
Again, my opponent's comments reflect a lack of understanding about the different roles between law enforcement and being a prosecutor. And it's understandable given his limited experience as a prosecutor. But prosecutors are supposed to make decisions based on going forward after an arrest is made. The fact that we decided not to prosecute protesters in no way says those arrests were invalid. Arrests are made based on what's happening on the ground at the time. If law enforcement's responding to a situation where they feel like an arrest needs to be made for public safety, whether it's for someone who is protesting in a certain way, or it's in a domestic violence case, or it's some other crime, we then take a second look at it and just determine whether we have the evidence to go forward and whether there's a public policy served through prosecuting that person. In this case, there was no public benefit to prosecuting people who were exercising their First Amendment rights peacefully.
Can I respond real quick just for a second?
You can, and then we have one more caller, and then I'm going to just read off one last comment before we wrap up. Go, Mike.
Thank you. The type of support that I'm talking about is the same type that the state attorney's office routinely provides when law enforcement seeks input on warrants and the probable cause therefore, or on difficult charging decisions where they're not sure whether or not they've got all the elements of a crime established. And law enforcement is always reaching out to the state attorney's office to ensure that the decisions they're about to make are ones the state attorney's office feels good about. Why shouldn't that happen in a very complicated, fluid, and dynamic situation like a protest, the likes of which we haven't seen in years? Get out in front. Help them make the right decision at the right time when the decision is being made.
Okay, caller.
Hi, my question is for Mike Perotti. You criticized Andrew Warren for the response with COVID right now and releasing people from incarceration, yet you're not supporting releasing people from prosecution for the protest. Can you explain this discrepancy in your opinion?
Yeah, no.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you for the question. No, I'm first of all, the majority of the folks that got released from the jail happened outside of Mr. Warren's control. That was a decision the sheriff made initially. What I'm criticizing, though, is that if we've got all of these capacities to now come in and without endangering the community, in theory, no new danger to the community, but we're going to let these folks out. We're going to direct file these. We're not going to hold these people in jail. We're going to ROR all these others. If that can be done now, why couldn't that have been done before? And the ones that the charges were dropped on and released out, that might in fact have been the right thing to do. I will rely on the state attorney to make that decision. My statement is, did they have to be charged at all if maybe making the right decision from square one and not charging innocent, nonviolent protesters, as the articles in the media tells you that's what happened that night? Why do they need to have to go down that road at all? I'm not faulting anybody for trying to address COVID right now. It's interesting that we have these solutions now that could work just as well without a pandemic.
Okay. The last comment question that we're going to be taking tonight. What was the basis for dropping charges of 60 plus protesters, and how do we trust the current administration to properly charge individuals under similar, I don't know, he didn't see you, circumstances?
Circumstances.
Is what he meant.
Yeah.
Andrew, Mike,
Sure.
whomever.
So
wants
this
to
is a
take that.
follow-up of the last question. And to be clear, it's not that the charges were dropped. Charges were never filed. Police make an arrest, and then we determine whether or not to file charges in the first place. And the reason we didn't file charges was pretty simple. Because none of the 67 people who were protesting on that one night of June 2nd who were arrested for unlawful assembly, there was any allegation, much less any evidence, that any of those 67 had done anything other than peacefully protest. We know that night there were some people who did things other than peacefully protest. The reason why law enforcement stopped the protest in the first place is because people had thrown some bottles or bricks at a police car. That's what led to the protest being stopped. But none of the 67 people arrested out of the some 100, 150 people there were accused of doing any of those things. They were arrested because law enforcement made the decision, we don't want this to escalate into a worse situation. And they made the split-second decision on the spot to arrest them, whether right or wrong. Our decision is different. We come in afterwards and say, is there evidence of wrongdoing here? And is there any purpose in continuing to file charges to continue that process? The answer is no. Again, we've been pretty clear. If you're peacefully protesting, we're going to support your right to do so. Where you're committing some other crime, attacking law enforcement, vandalizing, stealing, rioting, looting, we're going to hold you accountable for it.
Mike,
Sounds like 67 people caught
anything
charges.
to add
they
to
didn't
that?
need to- yeah. Sounds like 67 people caught
Okay,
charges.
good. So
they
you
didn't need
agree
to
with
have.
that?
I've said what I said.
Okay,
I'm
great.
not going to
Okay.
second guess his decisions.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you both for joining us this evening. Thanks, Nina, for co-moderating with me. You're awesome
Yes,
as always.
it's been a pleasure,
And
gentlemen.
thank you for
very much.
Thank you all.
yes, and
Thank you.
and thank you to the viewers for tuning in tonight. Florida, you judge, Haiti Oropesa. Until next time, thank you
Good night.
and good night.